Tom Delgado wasn't the type to start trouble. At 60, with a grizzled beard, sun-creased skin, and a voice that could calm a riot, he had one thing on his mind: peace and quiet. After 3 decades of firefighting in Portland, he and his loyal golden retriever Max had retired to a quaint, cedar-framed home in Lake Cedar Falls, a sleepy Oregon town, where neighbor drama usually meant someone forgot to bring pie to the potluck. That peace lasted exactly 8 months. It was a Thursday morning in early spring when Tom first noticed something strange. Max was barking, not the usual bark at a squirrel or passing cyclist. No, this was different. Short bursts, low growl, tail stiff. Tom stepped out back, coffee in hand. The air was crisp. His hammock swayed gently, but Max stood frozen near the far fence, growling at a shiny new object that didn't belong there. Installed flush against his wooden privacy fence was a brand new iron gate, not leaning on it, not near it, attached to it, directly drilled into his side of the fence. Tom blinked. He walked over, examined the bolts, the hinges. They were fresh, professionally done. He looked to the left, his tomatoes untouched. To the right, his custom-built smoker still in place. Nothing stolen, just this gate open to nowhere. He glanced over the fence toward the property that backed into his vats. That's when he saw her. Karen Fairchild, the HOA president, white sun visor, clipboard in hand, and a smug look that said this wasn't an accident. Tom called out, "Karen, did you put a gate on my property?" She looked up from her papers like he'd just interrupted an opera. "Oh, Tom, yes. Isn't it charming? The board approved a community access plan to make the pond trail more reachable. I had it installed yesterday. You weren't home." Tom furrowed his brow. "That's my land." Karen's smile tightened. "Technically, it borders community space. It's really just a shared convenience. Nobody's trying to take anything. It's about access, harmony." He didn't say a word, just walked back inside. Max still growling at the metal intruder, now standing guard over their peace. By noon, Tom had zip-tied a large sign to the gate. Private property. Not trespassing. He didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, he checked the gate again. The sign was gone. In its place, a yellow sticky note. 4 words, written in curling cursive. "Don't be difficult. Community first." Tom stared at it. Read it twice. Then he crumpled it slowly, hands trembling, but not from fear. From the quiet realization that he wasn't dealing with someone clueless. He was dealing with someone calculated, someone who had a plan, and this gate was just the beginning. He walked inside and sat down at the kitchen table. Max climbed into his lap, uninvited. Tom didn't even notice. This wasn't about a fence or a gate. This was a war waiting to start. And Tom wasn't about to be the one caught unprepared. Because when someone installs a gate into your private yard without asking, you don't just close it, you build something they can't ignore. And Karen? She was about to learn that the hard way. Tom wasn't a man who jumped to conclusions. But everything about that gate rubbed him wrong. It wasn't just the invasion of space, it was the smugness, the sticky note, the presumption that this woman could simply insert herself into his life without consequence. He spent the next morning walking the perimeter of his property with a yellow legal pad, reviewing the original land survey tucked in his garage file cabinet. The boundary line was clear. The fence was within his land. The gate had no business there. Max followed him around with anxious energy, ears twitching every time Tom stopped to jot something down. The dog could sense it. Something in the air had shifted, and Max wasn't wrong. Later that afternoon, Tom marched down to the local county records office. After a brief conversation with a tired clerk and a small fee, he walked out with a certified copy of his property map and deed, clear as day. That corner of the fence, absolutely on his land. Tom went straight to the hardware store and returned with a new sign, sturdier, bolder, and screwed directly into the fence post. This time, it read, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." He even added a small padlock to the gate latch, not to keep Karen in, but to remind her this wasn't her playground. But Karen didn't respond with conversation or apology. She responded with escalation. The next morning, the padlock was gone, cut clean through, and once again, a small yellow post-it note fluttered from the iron gate. Obstruction of community property is against regulation. 4.3. Consider cooperation. Tom stared at it, stunned. This woman wasn't just ignoring boundaries, she was rewriting them, as if her HOA rulebook overrode state law, personal ownership, and common sense. He walked to her house and knocked, fists clenched in his jacket pockets. After a pause, Karen opened the door. Same visor, same perfect teeth. Her arms were crossed, clipboard resting at her hip like a sheriff's pistol. "Tom," she said, voice dripping with sugar. "2. What do I owe the visit?" "You cut my padlock." She blinked slowly. "It was impeding access. I notified the board." "Karen, this is my yard, my fence. That's not shared property." Her smile didn't waver. "Well, that's a matter of interpretation. The community voted in favor of increased trail access, and the gate simply offers convenience." "Convenience for you," Tom snapped. "Not for me." Karen's gaze hardened. just for a moment, before slipping back into her practiced expression of condescension. Tom, let's not be selfish. We're neighbors. And the HOA has spoken. He stood there for a few seconds, silent. He knew anger wouldn't work. Logic wouldn't either. She'd buried herself behind her role. There was no compromise coming, so he nodded, understood, and walked away. Back home, Tom stood at the window, arms folded as he watched Karen walk through his yard once again, this time, with a yoga mat slung over her shoulder and earbuds in, like she owned the place. Max growled. Tom didn't stop him. Later that day, Tom installed a Ring camera facing the gate. What followed was a parade. Teenagers cutting through his garden to adults walking a pair of poodles off leash. Someone actually urinated behind his shed. That gate had become a funnel for the neighborhood's worst behavior. And Karen, she used it daily, prancing through as if her own shortcut into town was the law of the land. Tom recorded every instance, made a spreadsheet, captured timestamps. He even caught a couple barely high schoolers making out under his maple tree one night while Karen's gate swayed in the breeze. This wasn't about one woman anymore. This was about what happened when someone cracked open a wall meant to protect you and invited chaos inside. So Tom sat at his kitchen table that evening with a beer in hand, dog curled at his feet, and stared at his notepad. The answer wasn't retaliation through argument. It wasn't a second sign. It was something bigger. If she wanted access, he'd give her something to access, but she wouldn't like what she found. And when he was done, she'd wish she never picked up that drill in the first place. The Ring cam didn't lie. By the end of the week, Tom had captured no less than 17 people strolling casually through his yard like it was a public park. Kids with backpacks cutting through after school, a jogger in neon leggings using his garden hose. Someone even had the audacity to toss a candy wrapper next to Max's water bowl. And Karen, she walked through daily, always the same, yoga mat, phone, oversized sunglasses, and that arrogant spring in her step, like she was gracing the property with her presence. Tom forwarded the video files to the HOA's official email address with a time-stamped complaint. He included screenshots, links to property records, and a calm but pointed message. The gate is on my land. I did not approve it. Your president is violating privacy laws. Please advise. He expected a response within a day or two. He got one in 48 hours. But it wasn't from a board member. It was from Karen, typed in Comic Sans and signed warmly. The email read, "We appreciate your feedback, Tom, but this matter has already been reviewed. As president of the HOA, I have authority to make improvements that benefit community accessibility. We trust that you, as a resident, will align with the best interests of the neighborhood." It wasn't a reply. It was a brush-off dressed in corporate politeness. Tom's hand tightened around the mouse. He didn't hit reply. He didn't storm next door. He just stood up, walked outside, and stared at that gate again. He didn't need their permission. He needed a plan. The next morning, Tom took a drive out to the edge of town and parked in front of a small brick building with a faded sign, and Sons Masonry. Inside, the air smelled of dust and stone. A man with gray hair and dusty boots looked up from a drafting table. "Manny," Tom said with a grin, "I need a wall." Manny Orozco was an old friend. They'd known each other since the early 90s, back when Tom was pulling people out of fires and Manny was laying down patios for half the city. Now both retired, they mostly crossed paths at barbecues or early morning fishing runs. But today wasn't social. Tom pulled out a folded map of his property and pointed to the gate. "I want something beautiful, solid, elegant, but more importantly, impassable." Manny raised an eyebrow. "How high?" 8 feet. "What kind of style?" Tom smiled. "The kind Karen can't ignore." By the afternoon, they had sketches and arched brick wall, clean and tasteful, with a curve that bent just enough to suggest grace. But behind the beauty, reinforced footings, a raised bed for added height, and a motion-activated sprinkler system embedded just on Tom's side. Not enough to hurt anyone, just enough to make them think twice. Tom submitted the design to the city and attached it to his home improvement permit request. The clerk gave it a once-over and stamped it. No HOA approval needed. By law, it was his property, his wall, his rules. Construction began 3 days later. It took Karen exactly 4 hours to notice. Tom was sipping coffee on his porch when she marched across his lawn in workout clothes, her ponytail bouncing with every angry step. "You can't do this," she snapped. Tom looked up from his mug. "Morning to you, too. You're blocking community access. That's obstruction. That violates multiple HOA regulations." Tom stood and motioned toward the wall in progress. "This wall is on my land. The city's fine with it. Maybe you should take it up with them." Karen crossed her arms, glancing at Manny and his crew, who were now laying the third row of bricks. "This is petty, Tom." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What's petty is drilling a gate into someone's yard and pretending it's community property. You broke the fence. You ignored warnings. You opened my backyard to anyone with feet and no manners." Expression didn't change, but her jaw tensed. "This won't end well for you," she said quietly. Tom smiled. "I know. That's what makes it fun." She turned and stormed back through her gate now. opening into a growing wall that would soon end her shortcut dreams for good. And as Tom watched her walk away, he couldn't help but chuckle, because the wall was just the start. She had no idea what else he had planned. The wall rose like a monument. By the end of the week it was already 5 feet tall and stretching wide, curving gently like a private fortress surrounding Tom's yard. Manny's team worked fast, laying each brick with precision. They weren't just building a wall, they were crafting a message. And every day that Karen watched it rise from her back porch, she grew more unhinged. Tom didn't speak to her again. He didn't need to. The brick spoke louder than any argument ever could. Karen's little gate now opened into a wall of silence. No more shortcut to the trail. No more strolls through Tom's tomatoes. The gate was still there, but it was a portal to nowhere. One afternoon, Manny stood beside Tom, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You know," he said, "we could add a little flair." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Flair?" Manny grinned. "Something tasteful, decorative, but annoying." That's when they came up with the perfect idea. A faux classical stone design, styled to match Karen's own stucco-heavy Mediterranean aesthetic. They even found white concrete peacock statues at a local garden store to set into the corners. "It's almost poetic," Tom chuckled. And they weren't done. Manny installed a hidden motion-activated sprinkler system just behind the wall, connected to a small sensor wired through the top. It was aimed precisely at the gates. Anyone who dared open it would get a wet, freezing reminder of whose yard they were in. It was the kind of system a gardener might use. But in this case, it had a different purpose entirely. By Saturday morning, the full brick wall stood in place, 8 feet tall, curved and flared, peacocks perched smugly at the top. And that sprinkler, now armed and waiting like a sentry in the shadows, Tom stood back, admiring the view. Max barked once, then sat quietly, tail wagging, and then, as if on cue, the gate creaked. Karen's hand appeared first, then the visor, then her full frame stepped through. It happened in seconds. The sensor tripped. A sharp hiss of water burst from the wall, catching her square in the chest. She shrieked, stumbled back, soaked to the bone. Tom didn't flinch. He just sipped his coffee from the porch and gave her a little wave. Karen shouted something, probably a mix of legal threats and HOA jargon, but he couldn't hear it over the sound of Max barking and the sprinkler finishing its glorious cycle. She slammed the gate shut behind her. Tom knew what would come next. Sure enough, the very next morning, he received a hand-delivered notice on official HOA letterhead. It accused him of violating architectural uniformity guidelines, and warned that his unauthorized construction may face penalties. Tom laughed out loud. He took a photo of the wall, the permit stapled to it, and the signed city approval. Then he sent them all in a cheerful email to the board. No response. Karen wasn't just losing the battle, she was losing control, and her frustration was starting to spill beyond Tom's backyard. A week later, 2 board members knocked on Tom's door, not to complain, but to ask questions. "Is it true she built a gate into your yard without your permission? She really authorized that without a vote." Tom offered them sweet tea and showed them the ring footage. They left with more questions than answers and looks of genuine concern. The cracks in Karen's empire were starting to show. But Tom wasn't done. Karen had played dirty from the beginning. Now it was time for the truth to come out, because once he pulled the right thread, the whole HOA might unravel, and all he had to do was wait. By Monday morning, the wall wasn't just a barrier, it was a neighborhood conversation piece. Tom hadn't expected the wall to draw so much attention, but it did. People walking their dogs slowed down to admire it. A neighbor from across the cul-de-sac even asked Manny for a quote. One of the kids who used to sneak through the gate now stared from the sidewalk with wide eyes, clutching his scooter like he was standing before a fortress. And Karen, she couldn't go a day without trying to retaliate. She began with complaints, calling the city inspector to report unapproved irrigation systems. He came, clipboard in hand, expecting drama. He left 30 minutes later with a glass of lemonade, a copy of the permit, and a photo of Max for his wife. The next day, Karen tried a different angle. She reported Tom for violating the HOA's architectural uniformity clause. The HOA board scheduled a special meeting to address the matter. Tom arrived early, clean-shaven, shirt tucked in. He brought a folder with every document in order: permit, land survey, photos of trespassing, and a USB stick loaded with ring cam footage. Karen arrived late, flustered, red-faced, talking too fast. The moment the meeting began, she launched into her speech. That Tom's wall was hostile, that it threatened community values, that she'd acted in everyone's best interest by installing the gate. But she didn't expect what came next. Tom stood, slow and steady, and plugged the USB into the board's laptop. The projector screen lit up, footage rolled. Karen, unlocking and stepping through the gate. A group of teens loitering behind Tom's shed, someone littering near his dog bowl, a jogger cutting through during a rainstorm, and finally, Karen herself, shouting after getting sprayed full force by the motion sprinkler. For a solid minute, the room was silent. Tom finally spoke. "My fence was intact. My yard was private. I didn't break anything. I didn't trespass. I didn't harass anyone. I built a wall on my land with permits. I did everything by the book." He paused and let the silence settle, but Karen, she drilled through. My fence invited strangers in, ignored warnings, cut my lock, left notes. Someone coughed near the back. A few board members looked toward Karen. One of them, a younger guy named Nick, shifted uncomfortably and whispered something to the treasurer. Karen tried to recover. I was trying to create community access. Tom cut her off gently. You were creating your own private shortcut through someone else's property. The chairman cleared his throat. Thank you both. We'll discuss this in private and release a statement next week. Karen stormed out before the meeting ended, practically knocking over the folding chairs. Tom stayed behind. Several board members approached him quietly. One muttered honestly, I had no idea she installed that gate without a vote. Another added, this changes things. By the following morning, the community group chat was on fire. Screenshots of the footage leaked. Word spread. Neighbors whispered at the mailbox. Side-eyed Karen when she passed by. The wall, once a passive symbol of boundary, had become something more. It was a symbol of resistance, and Karen was unraveling fast. 2 days later, she came to Tom's door, not to apologize but to issue one final warning. You've made a lot of enemies, she said coldly. People talk. Don't forget that this neighborhood still respects authority. Tom smiled, leaned against the doorframe. They respect honesty more. Karen's face twitched, but she said nothing. She turned and walked away. But Tom knew what that look meant. She wasn't going to stop. She was going to come back swinging. And when she did, she'd bring every trick, every rule, and every fake regulation she could dig out of her binder. Tom had just made her desperate, and desperate people do foolish things. Karen's threats didn't shake Tomba. They didn't sit easy, either. He knew her type. When people like Karen lost control, they didn't retreat. They doubled down. They didn't fix their mistakes. They found someone else to blame. And sure enough, within 2 days of their last confrontation, Tom got another surprise. This time, not in the form of a post-it note or a phony letter, but in cold, hard paper, a formal notice from the HOA. It accused him of violating the community's aesthetic uniformity covenant and gave him 30 days to either modify the wall to match community visual guidelines or face a daily fine of $100 until compliance was met. Tom wasn't shocked. He was insulted. He scanned the fine print. The letter was signed by Karen still acting as president. No board vote, no hearing, just her signature, her authority, her vendetta. That night, Tom sat on his porch with Max, curled at his feet, and flipped through the HOA handbook. The thing was thicker than a phone book and twice as vague. But he wasn't looking for rules. He was looking for weaknesses. And he found 1. Section 2.3, Leadership Conduct. Section 2.4, Violation of Procedural Bylaws. Section 3.7, Unauthorized Use of HOA Funds or Infrastructure. The next day, Tom printed everything. He stapled his property deed to the complaint letter. He included time-stamped emails, a photo of the cut lock, and a few still shots of Karen using the gate without permission. Then he mailed it to every single board member certified 3 days. Later, he got a knock on the door. It wasn't Karen. It was Nick Wan of the younger HOA board member standing awkwardly in a blazer that didn't quite fit. Mr. Delgado, Nick said, do you have a moment? Tom stepped aside. Nick sat at the kitchen table while Max sniffed his shoes. I'll be honest, he said. We thought Karen had your permission at first. She said the gate had been there when you moved in, but after seeing the footage and the documents you sent, he trailed off. Tom nodded. She crossed a line. Nick nodded back. More than one. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice like he was telling a state secret. We're calling an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow night? Karen doesn't know yet. We want you to be there. Tom didn't blink. I'll bring everything. The next evening, the meeting hall was packed. Half the neighborhood showed up even. The ones who never attended anything, unless snacks were involved. Everyone had heard about the wall, the gate, the sprinkler. But what really drew them in was the rumor that Karen had broken the very rules she enforced with an iron fist. Karen arrived 15 minutes late, breezing in with a stack of printed agendas and a practiced smile. She didn't notice that 5 of the board members weren't sitting beside her. They were sitting across from her. Tom stood near the front, with his file under one arm and Max sitting obediently by his side. When the meeting was called to order, Nick stood up. This session is to address serious procedural concerns about the actions of the HOA president. Karen actually laughed and tried to wave it off. This is ridiculous. We should be discussing fence height violations, not personal vendettas. But Nick didn't smile. Tom stepped forward, quietly, calmly. I didn't file a complaint, out of spite. I filed it because what happened wasn't just a personal boundary issue. It was abuse of power. Karen installed a gate into my private yard, without permission. She gave access to the public. She ignored warnings. Then she filed bogus fines to punish me for protecting my home. He looked around the room, and if she did it to me, who's next? There was a long silence. Then an older woman in the back raised her hand. She'd fined me last year for painting my mailbox. Said the blue didn't match community tones. Someone else added, she towed my daughter's car. Said it was parked 2 inches over the line. More voices followed, one after another. Like dominoes falling, Karen tried to shout over them, tried to regain control, but it was too late. The board called for a vote. Unanimous. Karen Fairchild was removed as HOA president on the spot, and for the first time in weeks, Tom finally exhaled. But he wasn't done, because Karen had left more than a gate in his fence. She had left behind a paper trail, and Tom was ready to use it. After Karen was ousted as HOA president, the neighborhood buzzed with relief and curiosity. But Tom knew the story wasn't over. Karen's gate wasn't just an act of defiance, it was a symptom of something deeper, something hidden beneath layers of bylaws and backroom deals. Late one evening, Tom sat in his garage, surrounded by paperwork, and his trusty dog Max snoozing at his feet. His phone buzzed with messages from neighbors eager for updates, but Tom was focused on one thing, digging through decades of property records. The deed to his property had been carefully preserved by his late father, a meticulous man who had once warned Tom about neighborhood politics and power struggles. As Tom scanned the aged pages, he found something that made his heart race. According to the official county records, the land Tom called home was never fully incorporated into the HOA. The boundaries on paper showed that his backyard, the very corner where Karen had installed her gate, was technically excluded from the HOA's jurisdiction. This meant Karen's gate was an unauthorized intrusion not just on his privacy, but also on legal property rights. Armed with this revelation, Tom prepared a package: the deed, the land survey, the HOA and a detailed letter outlining Karen's trespassing and the HOA's failure to respect the property boundaries. He sent the package to the HOA's legal counsel and the county zoning office, copying local news outlets. A week later, a reporter from the town newspaper showed up on his doorstep, curious about the controversy. Meanwhile, Karen's response was swift but desperate. She claimed ignorance of the deed's specifics and insisted she acted in the community's best interest. But the damage was done. At the next HOA meeting, this time without Karen, Tom presented his findings. The board members, some sheepish, some visibly shaken, acknowledged the oversight. The gate had never been theirs to install. That night, Tom filed a cease and desist order against Karen and the HOA, demanding the immediate removal of the gate and compensation for damages caused by unauthorized access and vandalism to his property. Face appeared on social media, painting herself as a victim of harassment and bullying by Tom in the neighborhood, but Tom didn't flinch. He had the land, the neighbors on his side. The court date was set, and Tom knew that the final act was approaching. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. It was about standing up to power, protecting what's rightfully yours, and making sure no one else in the neighborhood got steamrolled by someone like Karen. The courthouse was buzzing the morning of the hearing. Tom Delgado, in his neatly pressed firefighter dress blues, stood firm with Max by his side, a symbol of loyalty and steadfastness. Across the courtroom, Karen Fairchild sat flustered, clutching her papers like a lifeline. The judge called the room to order. The air was thick with anticipation. Karen's attorney began with a rehearsed spiel about community access, the importance of HOA regulations, and the greater good served by the gate. But Tom's lawyer, a sharp local advocate named Lisa, quickly dismantled those arguments with clear evidence. County deeds, property surveys, HOA meeting minutes, and the damning ring cam footage showing Karen trespassing repeatedly. Lisa turned to Karen's attorney and said, "The facts are simple. This gate was never authorized on Mr. Delgado's property. The HOA, led by Ms. Fairchild, acted outside their legal boundaries." The judge nodded. "Ms. Fairchild, did you have permission to install the gate?" Karen's cheeks flushed. "I believed it was communal property. The board had discussed it." The judge held up the county deed. "This document states otherwise. Property lines are clearly marked. Unauthorized access is trespassing." Then came the twist no one expected. Lisa presented a file marked HOA, Internal Communications. It revealed emails from Karen demanding the gate's installation before the board could meet, and approvals forged after the fact. The courtroom gasped. The judge's expression hardened. "This is serious misconduct." The ruling was swift. Karen was ordered to pay $3,200 in damages for trespassing, fence repair, and legal fees. The gate was to be removed within 2 weeks, at her expense. The HOA board was instructed to review its governance policies and hold a community meeting to prevent future abuses. As Karen slumped in defeat, Tom smiled softly. Outside the courtroom, neighbors applauded. Some approached Tom, thanking him for standing up not only for his home, but for everyone's rights. Tom looked at the old brick wall that had started this whole battle. It wasn't just a barrier. It was a symbol of resistance and resilience. As Max wagged his tail beside him, Tom said quietly, "Sometimes you have to build walls to protect what matters." Call to action. Thanks for watching this epic HOA showdown. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with friends who love a good revenge tale. Drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with a neighbor or HOA drama? We want to hear your story.